The ceremonial blade pressed against Orion Gable's throat as he knelt before the eternal flame, its golden light dancing across the marble walls of the Temple of Perpetual Dawn. High Priest Theron's voice echoed through the sacred chamber, each word dripping with righteous fury. "You dare question the sacred texts?" Theron's grip tightened on the ornate handle. "The darkness beyond our blessed realm is death itself, young acolyte. Would you condemn our people to frozen perdition?" Orion's breath came in short gasps. Around him, a dozen other acolytes watched in terrified silence, their white robes stark against the temple's gleaming surfaces. The planet Solace hung motionless in space, its sun-facing hemisphere bathed in eternal daylight while the far side remained locked in perpetual night. For 3 generations, the solar priests had maintained order by preaching the divine truth. The light side was paradise, the dark side was hell. "I only asked why the monitoring stations on the Terminator line go silent," Orion whispered, referring to the twilight border between light and dark. "Why our scouts never returned from—" The blade bit deeper, drawing a thin line of blood. "Because there is nothing but death in the darkness. The frozen hell consumes all who enter." Theron's eyes blazed with fervor. "Your doubt is a cancer, boy. It spreads. Already, other acolytes whisper your questions in dark corners. They wonder why our scouts' final transmissions speak of anomalous readings before going silent. They ask why the automated weather stations along the Terminator line require constant replacement." Captain Jorik Vale stepped forward from the shadows, his hand resting on his plasma rifle. The leader of the Temple Guard was younger than Theron but twice as dangerous, his cybernetic eye glowing amber in the firelight. His face bore the scars of someone who had spent years patrolling the Terminator line, though he never spoke of what he'd seen there. "High Priest, perhaps we should." Silence. Theron's attention never wavered from Orion. "Tell me, acolyte, do you renounce your heretical questions? Do you embrace the light?" Orion closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his faith crumbling. 3 years of devoted service, 3 years of believing every word, and now, "I cannot lie in the sacred chamber," he whispered. The blade withdrew and Orion slumped forward, gasping. Theron's expression shifted from rage to cold calculation. "Then you will learn the truth of darkness firsthand. Guards, take him to the exile chamber." As rough hands dragged him away, Orion caught a glimpse of the other acolytes' faces. Some showed relief that it wasn't them. Others displayed the zealous satisfaction of the truly faithful. But in the back he saw Elena Voss, her green eyes filled with something he'd never seen before, doubt. She had been asking questions too, he realized. Quieter questions, more careful ones, but questions nonetheless. The exile chamber sat at the very edge of the temple complex, where the eternal sunlight began to dim toward the Terminator line. Through reinforced windows, Orion could see the carefully maintained gardens and residential districts that housed Solace's 40,000 citizens. Everything was white and gold, pristine and perfect, designed to reflect the glory of their eternal day. Children played in the parks while their parents worked in the hydroponic facilities and manufacturing centers. It was a society built on absolute certainty. Everyone knew their place, their purpose, their unquestionable truth about the world beyond their borders. But beyond the city's edge, where the light grew dim, shadows stretched toward an unknown horizon. And for the first time, Orion wondered what those shadows might be hiding. "The dark side is a frozen wasteland," Theron intoned, following the traditional exile ritual. "No air, no warmth, no life. You will walk into that hell, and your death will serve as a reminder to all who would question the divine order." He gestured to a waiting transport. "The automated shuttle will carry you to the Terminator line. From there you walk." Jorik Vale approached with a standard survival pack, 3 days of food, water recycling unit, and a basic environmental suit. "The suit has a beacon," he said quietly. "It will record your final moments." "For educational purposes," Theron added with grim satisfaction. As the shuttle carried Orion toward the Terminator line, he stared through the small window at the gradually dimming landscape. The white buildings gave way to automated agricultural domes, then to scattered monitoring stations. Finally, only the endless curve of the planet's surface remained, bathed in the strange twilight of the border zone. The shuttle's AI announced their destination in a cheerful tone. Exile Point 17. Temperature, -40 Celsius. Atmospheric pressure, standard. Please gather your belongings and prepare for disembarkation. Orion suited up with shaking hands. The environmental suit was designed for temporary exposure, not extended survival in the frozen hell of the dark side. As the shuttle's door hissed open, bitter cold rushed in, and he stepped onto a rocky plateau that stretched toward the Terminator. But something was wrong. The ground wasn't covered in ice. The air, while cold, wasn't the lethal freeze described in the sacred texts. And in the distance, where absolute darkness should have reigned, Orion saw something impossible, a faint glow on the horizon. He activated his suit's recorder, knowing the signal would reach the temple complex. Day 1 of exile. I can breathe. The temperature is cold but not fatal. I'm going to investigate the anomalous light signature. As he walked toward the Terminator, the shuttle departed behind him, its lights disappearing into the eternal day. Each step carried him deeper into forbidden territory, and with each step, the glow ahead grew brighter. After 2 hours of walking, his legs aching from the unfamiliar exertion in the cold, Orion crested a ridge and gasped. Below him stretched a valley filled with impossible sights. Structures that weren't frozen ruins but functioning buildings, their surfaces glowing with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed like living heartbeats. Gardens filled with strange, phosphorescent plants that seemed to dance in the perpetual twilight. And people, dozens of them, moving between the buildings with purpose and organization, their clothing appearing to be grown rather than woven, their skin holding a faint luminescence that made them seem like beings from another world. The dark side wasn't hell. It was home to a thriving civilization that had adapted to conditions the solar priests claimed were impossible. This is impossible, he breathed into his recorder. The sacred texts, everything we've been taught. His voice broke. It's all been a lie. A plasma bolt sizzled past his head, and Orion spun to see 3 figures in temple guard armor approaching, led by Captain Vale himself. The cybernetic eye glowed as it focused on him. Step away from the edge, Acolyte, Vale commanded. What you're seeing is a thermal mirage, a trick of the cooling atmosphere. Return to your exile point. But you can see them too. Orion pointed toward the valley. The buildings, the lights, the people. Illusions born of oxygen deprivation and hypothermia, Vale replied, but his voice lacked conviction. The High Priest sent us to document your final moments. For the good of the faith. Orion realized with growing horror that Vale wasn't here to rescue him. He was here to ensure Orion died before he could report what he'd found. The temple guard raised their weapons, and Orion did the only thing he could. He jumped. The fall down the rocky slope was chaos. Tumbling, sliding, his environmental suit system screaming warnings as he bounced off stones and scraped through patches of strange, glowing moss. Plasma bolts tracked his descent, leaving glowing scars in the rock above him. He crashed through what looked like a garden of crystalline trees, their branches chiming like bells as they shattered around him. Pain lanced through his left arm, and his suit's integrity alarms howled. But he was alive, lying in a pool of luminescent blue sap that seemed to slow his bleeding. Don't move, a voice commanded from the darkness. Your suit's compromised, and the local atmosphere isn't what you're used to. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall, athletic, with skin that held a faint luminescence and eyes that seemed to hold their own light. She wore clothing that looked organic, grown rather than manufactured, and her movements had the fluid grace of someone perfectly adapted to this environment. Who are you? Orion gasped. Seraphina Kai, she replied, kneeling beside him. And you're the exile who just discovered our secret. She looked up toward the ridge where muzzle flashes still flickered. Your friends up there seem determined to kill you before you can tell anyone what you've seen. They're not my friends, Orion said bitterly. Not anymore. Seraphina smiled, and her luminescent features were both beautiful and alien. Then welcome to the real world, Solar Priest. Welcome to the dark side. The underground passages beneath the valley were a revelation. Carved from living rock and lined with the same bioluminescent moss that grew throughout the dark side, they formed a network that connected every building in the settlement. As Seraphina led him deeper, Orion saw wonders that shattered everything he believed about this supposedly dead hemisphere. We call it Umbral City, Seraphina explained, her voice echoing in the tunnels. Population, about 12,000. We've been here for over a century, ever since the first exiles discovered that the dark side wasn't the frozen hell your priests claimed. They emerged into a vast cavern illuminated by thousands of bioluminescent organisms. Buildings carved from the cavern walls housed workshops, laboratories, and living spaces. Children played in gardens of phosphorescent fungi, their laughter echoing off the stone walls. It was alien but undeniably alive, a thriving ecosystem that had adapted to perpetual darkness. How is this possible? Orion asked, his wounded arm now treated with some kind of organic healing compound. The temperature, the atmospheric pressure. Your planet's rotation was slowed by tidal forces, but it wasn't stopped completely, Serafina explained. There's still atmospheric circulation, geothermal activity, and a complex ecosystem that evolved in darkness. Your priests chose not to explore because exploration would threaten their control. A commotion at the cavern's entrance interrupted them. A group of armed guards escorted a prisoner into the settlement, a temple guard with a broken helmet, his white armor scorched and cracked. We found him trying to set up an observation post on the ridge, one of the guards reported. He was calling in coordinates for an orbital strike. Serafina's expression darkened. An orbital strike? They'd destroy the entire valley to keep their secret? The prisoner raised his head, and Orion recognized the young guard who had often served with Captain Vale. The High Priest has authorized Protocol 7, the guard said, his voice hollow with shock. Total sterilization of the contaminated zone. He said the heresy must not spread. Within an hour, Umbral City's council chamber filled with heated debate. Representatives from various settlements throughout the dark side argued over response strategies, their bioluminescent skin patterns shifting with emotion. Serafina stood at the center, trying to maintain order. The solar priests have never directly attacked us before, argued Councillor Vex, his skin flashing red with agitation. This is an escalation we're not prepared for. Then we make them pay for their escalation, growled another voice from the back. A massive figure pushed through the crowd, easily 7 feet tall, his skin glowing a deep purple, cybernetic implants visible along his arms and skull. I'm Thane Croax, military coordinator for the northern settlements. We've been preparing for this day. Serafina turned to Orion. Your arrival has forced their hand. They can't let word of our existence reach the general population on the light side. Too many people would start asking questions. How many settlements are there? Orion asked. 17 major cities, 43 smaller communities, Croax answered. Nearly 200,000 people total. We're not some handful of exiles huddling in caves. We're a civilization. The revelation staggered Orion. For generations, the solar priests had been exiling heretics to what they claimed was certain death. Instead, they'd been feeding a growing population of free thinkers, dissidents, and truth seekers. The orbital platforms have been moving into position, reported a technician monitoring communications intercepts. We estimate 6 hours before they're in optimal firing position. Then we need to move now, Serafina decided. Thane, mobilize your forces. We're going to hit their command center. The assault on the Solar Priest's orbital monitoring station should have been straightforward. Serafina's team had been planning it for years, a way to disable the surveillance network that watched the Terminator line. What they hadn't expected was Captain Vale's trap. As their stolen transport approached the station, concealed weapons platforms emerged from hidden positions. Plasma cannons designed to vaporize asteroids turned their attention to the small ship, and only desperate piloting by Croax kept them from being incinerated immediately. It's an ambush, Serafina shouted over the alarms. They knew we were coming. The ship shuddered under repeated hits, systems failing one by one. Through the viewports, Orion could see Vale's flagship approaching, a sleek destroyer that dwarfed their converted transport. This is Captain Jorik Vale, came the transmission. Surrender the exile and the terrorist leader, and your people will be granted quick deaths instead of orbital bombardment. Croax snarled, his implants glowing with fury. I've got 1 shot left in the main cannon. I can take out their bridge, but we'll never survive the explosion. Do it, Serafina ordered. Wait, Orion interrupted. There's another way. He activated the ship's communication array. Captain Vale, this is Orion Gable. I'm coming aboard your ship. Alone. Absolutely not, Serafina snapped. If I don't, he destroys Umbral City and everyone in it, Orion replied. But if I surrender, maybe I can convince him that the truth doesn't have to threaten everything. He was wrong. The moment Orion materialized on Vale's bridge, restraint fields locked him in place. The captain approached slowly, his cybernetic eye scanning Orion with cold precision. You've seen too much, Vale said simply. And so have your new friends. Protocol 7 is already in motion. Through the viewports, Orion watched in horror as the orbital platforms opened fire. Lances of concentrated energy struck the dark side surface, turning stone to glass and wiping entire settlements from existence. Stop, Orion screamed. They're innocent people. They're a contamination, Vale replied. A threat to the stability that has kept our civilization alive for 3 generations. His expression was genuinely pained. I take no joy in this, acolyte, but some truths are too dangerous to be allowed to exist. Orion's cell aboard Vale's flagship gave him a perfect view of the destruction. The orbital bombardment continued for hours, each blast erasing another community from the dark side's surface. But something strange was happening. The energy readings from the planet were spiking, and not just from the weapon strikes. A young technician named Kes approached his cell during the night shift, her face pale with shock. "I've been monitoring the planetary scans," she whispered. "The bombardment is causing massive tectonic instability. The planet's core is more active than we thought." "What does that mean?" Orion asked. "It means we're not just committing genocide," Kes replied. "We're destabilizing the entire planet. The light side cities aren't far enough from the impact zones. If the planetary shell cracks..." Orion understood immediately. Solace wasn't just tidally locked, it was geologically fragile. The orbital bombardment was threatening to trigger planetary collapse. "You have to tell Captain Vale," Orion urged. "I tried. He says it's acceptable losses for the greater good." Kes's hands shook as she accessed the cell controls. "But I've seen the projections. There won't be a greater good left to save." The cell door hissed open, and alarms immediately began blaring throughout the ship. Kes had triggered a general alert to cover their escape, but it would only buy them minutes. "The shuttle bay is this way," she said, leading him through corridors filled with running crew members. "I've programmed an escape pod to take you back to the surface. Maybe you can warn the survivors." They reached the shuttle bay as security forces converged on their position. Kes shoved Orion toward an escape pod while she held them off with a stolen plasma rifle. "Tell them about the planetary core," she shouted over the weapon's fire. "Tell them the bombardment has to stop." The pod launched just as Kes fell to a security team's stun blast. As Orion plummeted toward the dark side's scarred surface, he saw the orbital platforms continuing their methodical destruction, each blast bringing the planet closer to catastrophic failure. The pod crashed in the ruins of what had been the northern settlements. The bioluminescent plants were dying, their light fading as toxic dust from the bombardment poisoned the atmosphere. Orion activated his emergency beacon and waited. He didn't have to wait long. A camouflaged vehicle emerged from a concealed bunker, and Thane Croax climbed out, his massive frame moving with surprising grace. "Serafina?" Orion asked. "Leading the evacuation of Umbral City," Croax replied grimly. "We've lost 8 settlements already, but most of the population made it to the deep caverns. The question is whether we can stop this before the planet cracks." "There might be a way," Orion said, sharing what Kes had told him about the planetary core. "If we can prove that the bombardment threatens the light side too, maybe we can force them to stop." "The Solar Priest's command center is in the temple complex," Croax mused. "Their central computer has access to all planetary monitoring data. If we could broadcast the truth to the entire population, it would require getting past the temple guard, infiltrating the most secure location on the light side, and somehow accessing a system that's been designed to prevent exactly that kind of breach," Orion pointed out. Croax's implants glowed brighter. "Sounds like fun." The stolen temple guard transport that carried them toward the light side was barely functional, its systems damaged by radiation from the ongoing bombardment. As they approached the temple complex, Orion could see massive crowds gathering in the central plaza, their white robes bright against the marble streets. "Emergency broadcast from High Priest Theron," crackled the radio. "Citizens of Solace, the heretical contamination has been contained. The dark side plague will not spread to our blessed realm." "Plague?" Orion said bitterly. "He's calling us a plague?" "Look at the crowd," Croax observed. "They're not celebrating. They're afraid." He was right. Even from their altitude, Orion could see the tension in the gathered citizens. Children clung to their parents, adults whispered nervously to one another, and temple guards maintained an unusually heavy presence throughout the plaza. "The bombardment is causing seismic activity," Orion realized. "The light side is feeling the planetary instability too." Their transport touched down at a maintenance facility on the city's outskirts. The few workers present didn't question their presence. In the chaos following the emergency broadcasts, 2 guards transporting a prisoner seemed routine. But as they approached the temple complex, the reality of their situation became clear. The building was in full lockdown, security barriers activated, and patrol drones circling the perimeter. There, Croax pointed to a thermal exhaust vent near the base of the temple. "Service tunnels. If we can get past the intake filters." The infiltration took 3 hours of careful movement through maintenance shafts and service corridors. When they finally reached the central computer core, Orion was amazed by its size, a massive quantum processor that monitored every aspect of life on Solace. The planetary stress data is all here, Croax reported, his implants interfacing directly with the system. Core temperature rising, tectonic plate movement increasing, atmospheric pressure changes. The bombardment is definitely destabilizing the planet. Then we broadcast it, Orion said. Show everyone what's really happening. But as they prepared to transmit the data, the chamber's main door exploded inward. High Priest Theron strode through the smoke, flanked by temple guards, his ceremonial robes billowing dramatically. I wondered when you would come, Theron said calmly. The exile who discovered our necessary lies. Necessary? Orion stepped forward, his anger overwhelming his fear. You're destroying an entire civilization. People who did nothing but think differently. People who threaten the stability that keeps our species alive, Theron replied. Do you think maintaining a civilization on a tidally locked planet is simple? Do you imagine that 40,000 people can survive without absolute unity of purpose? He gestured to the data streams flowing around them. Every resource carefully rationed, every citizen precisely placed in their role, every thought and action directed toward our common survival. And then you come along with your questions, your doubts, your dangerous truths. The dark side people aren't a threat to anyone, Orion argued. They've built their own civilization, their own solutions. They could have been partners, not enemies. Partners? Theron laughed bitterly. Do you know what happens when people start thinking they have choices? When they believe there are alternatives to the system that keeps them alive. His eyes blazed with fanatic fervor. They stop following orders. They stop accepting their roles. They fragment into competing factions and civilizations die. Croax's implants flared as he continued accessing the computer. Got it, he announced. Planetary broadcast ready. Stop him, Theron ordered his guards. But before anyone could move, another figure entered the chamber, Captain Vale, his armor scorched and his cybernetic eye flickering erratically. High Priest, he said formally. The orbital bombardment must cease immediately. Captain? Theron frowned. I gave you no such order. The planetary core is destabilizing, Vale continued, his voice hollow. Our own seismologists confirm it. If we continue the bombardment, the tectonic cascade will reach the light side within days. We're not just destroying the dark side settlements, we're destroying ourselves. Lies? Theron snarled. Contamination from exposure to the heretics. Vale's hand moved to his weapon. High Priest, I have served faithfully for 15 years. I have executed your orders without question. But I will not be party to the extinction of our species. The chamber erupted in chaos as temple guards found themselves choosing sides. Some remained loyal to Theron, others followed Vale's lead, and still others seemed paralyzed by the conflict. In the confusion, Croax completed his work. The planetary broadcast system activated, sending the truth directly to every communication device on Solace. Seismic data, population figures from the dark side, and video evidence of the thriving settlements that had been systematically destroyed. You've doomed us all, Theron whispered, staring at the data streams. When people learn they have choices, they choose chaos. The truth spread across Solace like wildfire. In the temple complex's plaza, the crowd's murmur grew to a roar as citizens accessed the broadcast data on their personal devices. Images of Umbral City, population statistics, seismic projections, all of it flooding through the carefully maintained information barriers. We need to reach the orbital command center, Seraphina's voice crackled through the stolen communication array. She had somehow made it to the light side with a group of survivors from the dark side settlements. The bombardment platforms are still firing. The planetary core won't stabilize until they stop. High Priest Theron stood at the chamber's central console, his hands moving across controls with desperate precision. I can contain this, he muttered. Information blackout, emergency protocols, martial law. It's too late for that, Vale said quietly. His cybernetic eye displayed streams of data from across the planet. Citizens are demanding answers. Temple guards in 17 districts have refused orders to suppress the protests. Your control is breaking. Through the chamber's windows, Orion could see the crowds in the plaza growing larger. White-robed citizens mixed with people in the organic clothing of the dark side settlements, their bioluminescent skin patterns creating an alien light show against the temple's marble walls. The plan is simple, Croax announced, having accessed the orbital command protocols. The bombardment platforms are controlled from 3 locations: Here, the Northern Command Post and the Orbital Defense Station. We need to shut down all three simultaneously to stop the firing sequence. I can handle the Northern Command, Vale offered. My security codes are still valid. And I'll take the Orbital Station, Serafina added. But someone needs to stay here and make sure Theron doesn't restart the bombardment. Orion understood immediately. That's me. As the others prepared to leave, Serafina approached Orion. In the chamber's artificial light, her bioluminescent features seemed almost ethereal. When I first saw you fall into our valley, I thought you were just another exile, she said softly. Someone who had asked the wrong questions and paid the price. Maybe I was, Orion replied. Maybe we all were. No. She touched his face, her warm fingers tracing the scar left by Theron's ceremonial blade. You were someone who refused to accept comfortable lies. That's rarer than you think. Croax interrupted their moment, his implants glowing with urgency. The seismic activity is accelerating. We've got maybe 2 hours before the planetary crust fractures beyond repair. Then we'd better not waste time, Vale said grimly. He looked at Orion with something approaching respect. For what it's worth, Acolyte, your questions were worth asking. As they departed through the chamber service tunnels, Orion found himself alone with High Priest Theron. The older man sat slumped at the central console, his ceremonial robes wrinkled and stained. They don't understand, Theron said quietly. Order. Stability. The careful balance required to keep a civilization alive on a world like this. He looked up at Orion with haunted eyes. Do you know how many colony ships failed because they couldn't maintain unity? How many worlds were abandoned because their settlers fragmented into competing factions? But the people on the dark side weren't trying to destroy anything, Orion replied. They were just living their lives. Living their lives differently, Theron corrected. Proving that our way wasn't the only way. Do you understand what that would do to our society? When people start believing they have choices, they stop accepting sacrifice. They stop following the difficult path that keeps everyone alive. The first orbital platform went silent 30 minutes later as Vale's team successfully infiltrated the Northern Command Post. Through the chamber's communication array, Orion could hear the brief firefight that preceded the shutdown, followed by Vale's terse report, Northern Grid offline. Serafina's assault on the Orbital Defense Station took longer. The facility was heavily automated, designed to resist exactly the kind of boarding action she was attempting. But the dark side dwellers had developed their own technology over the decades, biological weapons that could eat through metal, electromagnetic pulses generated by living organisms, and camouflage techniques that fooled both human and artificial sensors. Second platform offline, came her report. But I'm reading massive structural damage to the station. The explosion might take out half the orbital infrastructure. Do it, Orion replied. We'll rebuild. That left only the temple complex's command center, and High Priest Theron, who had spent the last hour systematically overriding the shutdown protocols. I won't let you destroy everything we've built, Theron said, his fingers dancing across the controls. The bombardment will continue until the contamination is eliminated. Orion moved toward the main console, but Theron drew his ceremonial blade, the same one that had cut Orion's throat hours earlier. You don't understand the weight of leadership, Theron snarled, the blade gleaming in the chamber's light. The terrible choices required to keep people alive. I have carried that burden for 20 years. And it's driven you mad, Orion replied, circling the older man carefully. You're not protecting our people anymore. You're destroying them. They clashed in the center of the chamber, ceremonial blade against desperate improvisation. Theron was skilled, trained in the traditional combat arts of the temple guards, but Orion had learned new techniques during his brief time on the dark side. Where Theron relied on formal sword work, Orion used environmental advantages, computer cables as improvised weapons, console edges for leverage, the chamber's uneven lighting to create deceptive shadows. The dark side changed you, Theron panted during a brief pause in their fight. Made you alien. Inhuman. It made me free, Orion replied. The final exchange was brief but decisive. Theron overcommit to a killing thrust, confident in his superior training. But Orion had learned to think differently, to see alternatives where others saw only rigid doctrine. He sidestepped the blade, grabbed Theron's wrist, and used the High Priest's own momentum to drive him into the main console. Sparks exploded as Theron's body struck the quantum processor core. Alarms shrieked through the chamber as systems overloaded and failed. The High Priest slumped to the floor, his eyes staring at nothing. Third platform offline, Orion reported into the communication array. Bombardment terminated. But even as he spoke, he could feel the floor trembling beneath his feet. The damage had been done. The planetary core was still unstable, still building toward catastrophic failure. Croax's voice crackled through the failing communication system. The core stabilization requires a massive energy input, something to counteract the tectonic disruption. The temple complex has the most powerful reactor on the planet. Orion understood immediately. The temple's fusion reactor could indeed provide enough energy to stabilize the planetary core, but only if it was overloaded in a carefully controlled manner. The explosion would destroy everything within a 50-kilometer radius. "I can set up the overload sequence," he said quietly, "but I won't be able to get clear in time." "There has to be another way." Serafina's voice was strained with static and emotion. "There isn't," Orion replied, already moving toward the reactor control systems. "And even if there was, we don't have time to find it." The reactor chamber was a cathedral of technology, gleaming conduits, humming power cores, and at the center, the fusion containment field that powered the entire temple complex. Orion had studied these systems as an acolyte, never imagining he would use that knowledge to destroy everything he had once held sacred. The overload sequence was complex but not impossible. He rerouted power from the orbital communication arrays, disabled the automatic safety systems, and began the careful process of destabilizing the fusion reaction. Through the chamber's communication system, he could hear reports from across Solace. The orbital bombardment had stopped, but the seismic activity was still building. Without the reactor sacrifice, the planet would tear itself apart within hours. "Orion," Serafina's voice was barely audible through the static. "I wanted you to know, the dark side isn't gone. We saved most of the population, got them to the deep caverns. There will be survivors." "Good," he replied, tears streaming down his face as he entered the final sequence. "Someone needs to ask the difficult questions." The explosion lit up Solace's day side like a second sun. The fusion reactor's controlled overload sent massive energy waves deep into the planetary core, stabilizing the tectonic disruption but erasing the temple complex and everything within 50 kilometers. Standing on a ridge overlooking the blast crater, Serafina watched the mushroom cloud slowly disperse. Beside her, Captain Vale removed his temple guard helmet and let it fall to the ground. "The seismic readings are stabilizing," he reported quietly. "The planetary core is cooling back to normal levels." Around them, groups of survivors from both sides of Solace worked together to establish temporary shelters. The rigid social structure that had dominated the light side was gone, shattered by the revelation of the dark side's existence. In its place, something new was emerging, messier, more chaotic but undeniably alive. "What happens now?" Vale asked. Serafina's bioluminescent skin patterns shifted to show complex emotions: grief, hope, determination. "Now we learn to live without comfortable lies," she said. "We build a society based on truth instead of control." "It won't be easy," Vale warned. "People are going to make mistakes. There will be conflicts, disagreements, failures." "Yes," Serafina agreed, her eyes focused on the mixed groups of light side and dark side survivors working together below them. "But they'll be our mistakes, our choices, our failures to learn from." She reached into her pack and withdrew Orion's personal recorder, recovered from the blast zone. The device was damaged but still functional, its memory core intact. "He wanted people to ask difficult questions," she said softly. "I think we owe it to him to keep asking them." In the distance, the eternal sun continued its watch over Solace, but its light now illuminated a very different world. The rigid divide between light and dark was gone, replaced by the complex spectrum of a society learning to see in shades of truth. The Solar Priest heresy had become humanity's salvation, not through the comfortable certainties of faith, but through the difficult courage of questioning everything they thought they knew. And in the growing twilight where two civilizations learned to become one, Orion Gable's sacrifice had given them the most precious gift of all, the freedom to choose their own path among the stars.